Colonel Jasmine Reynolds was tired but happy as she drove home from the military base. It had been a long day of meetings, training sessions, and paperwork, but she loved her job serving her country. The evening sky was turning a beautiful shade of orange and purple as the sun began to set. She had plans to call her sister and then enjoy a quiet dinner at home. As she turned onto the main road heading toward her neighborhood, she noticed flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror. Jasmine checked her speed. She wasn't speeding. She signaled and pulled over to the shoulder of the road, turning down her radio and placing both hands on the steering wheel like she always did during traffic stops. Through her side mirror, she watched as a police officer stepped out of his patrol car. He was tall with broad shoulders, walking with stiff, deliberate steps toward her car. Officer Brandon Miller adjusted his belt as he approached, his face serious and unsmiling. "License and registration," he said flatly, not offering any greeting or explanation for the stop. His tone was cold, almost challenging. "Good evening, officer," Jasmine replied politely. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer's jaw tightened. "I said license and registration, ma'am." His hand moved to rest on his holster, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Jasmine. "Of course," she said calmly, despite feeling a knot forming in her stomach. "My registration is in the glove compartment and my license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" The officer gave a curt nod, watching her every move with suspicious eyes. Jasmine carefully retrieved her documents and handed them to the officer. He glanced at them briefly before handing them back. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered suddenly. "Excuse me?" Jasmine asked, confused. This was supposed to be a routine traffic stop. She hadn't been speeding or driving recklessly. "I said step out of the vehicle now." His voice was harder now, with an edge that made Jasmine's heart beat faster. She took a deep breath to stay calm. In her 15 years of military service, she had learned how to handle tense situations. She unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly opened her car door. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked as she stepped onto the asphalt road. Officer Miller didn't answer her question. Instead, he took a step back and pointed to the ground. "Kneel down. Hands where I can see them." Jasmine froze. "Kneel." "Officer, I don't understand what's happening here. Could you please explain what I've done wrong?" "I'm not going to ask again," he said, his hand now firmly gripping his holster. "Kneel down on the ground, now." A car drove by slowly, the passengers inside watching the scene with wide eyes. Another car followed, then another. Traffic was beginning to slow as people noticed what was happening on the side of the road. Jasmine felt a mix of emotions: confusion, anger, humiliation. But mostly, she felt a deep sadness. This wasn't the first time she had been treated differently because of the color of her skin, but it never got easier. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she tried once more, keeping her voice steady and respectful despite the situation. "There's no misunderstanding. You failed to use your turn signal back there and now you're refusing to comply with an officer's orders." His voice was loud enough that people in passing cars could hear. Jasmine knew this wasn't true. She always used her turn signal. It was automatic for her. But she also knew that arguing would only make things worse. With a heavy heart, she slowly lowered herself to her knees on the hot asphalt. The rough surface bit into her skin through her dress pants. The setting sun still gave off enough heat to make the road uncomfortably warm. Cars continued to slow down, and she could see people staring. Some had their phones out, recording the incident. Officer Miller stepped closer, looking down at her. "Put your hands on your head." As Jasmine complied, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: helplessness. Not since basic training had someone had this kind of power over her. As a colonel, she commanded respect, led troops, and made decisions that impacted national security. Yet here she was, kneeling on the side of a road because an officer said so. "Officer, I'd like to show you something in my jacket pocket," Jasmine said carefully. "It's my military ID. I'm a colonel in the United States Army." Officer Miller scoffed. "Yeah, right." Slowly then. "Any sudden moves and we'll have a problem." Keeping one hand on her head, Jasmine carefully reached into her inner jacket pocket and pulled out her military identification card. The gold eagle emblem caught the fading sunlight as she held it up. The officer took it from her hand, his expression changing as he read the ID. "Colonel Jasmine Reynolds, United States Army." His eyes moved from the ID to her face and back again several times. The confidence drained from his face like water from a tub. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His hand still holding her ID began to tremble just enough to notice. "Is there still a problem, Officer Miller?" Jasmine asked quietly. More cars had stopped now. At least 3 people were recording videos on their phones from various angles. One woman had stepped out of her car and was watching with her hand over her mouth. Officer Miller seemed frozen in place, suddenly aware of the audience they had attracted, and the significant error in judgment he had made. The realization that he had just forced a high-ranking military officer to kneel on a public road over a false traffic violation, while being recorded by multiple witnesses, was clearly sinking in. You can stand up, ma'am," he finally managed to say, his voice now lacking all of its previous authority. He extended a hand to help her up, which Jasmine politely declined. She rose to her feet with the same dignity and grace that had earned her respect throughout her military career. Despite the dirt now staining her pants and the burning sensation in her knees, she stood tall, shoulders back, head high, the posture of someone accustomed to command. "Officer Miller," she said in a clear, measured tone that carried to the onlookers, "I would appreciate my ID back." He handed it to her quickly, his eyes now unable to meet hers. "Thank you," she said, tucking the ID back into her pocket. "Now would you kindly explain why I was pulled over and asked to kneel on the road?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, aware that everything he said was likely being recorded by the growing number of bystanders. "There was a report of a vehicle matching your description involved in an incident nearby. It was a poor excuse, and they both knew it. There had been no such report." "No such incident, I see," Jasmine replied. She took out a small notebook from her purse and wrote down the officer's name and badge number, which were clearly displayed on his uniform. "I believe this interaction warrants further discussion with your superior officers." Officer Miller's face paled even more. The confidence and aggression he had shown earlier had completely vanished, replaced by the look of someone who knew they had made a serious mistake that could affect their career. "Ma'am, Colonel, he began, but seemed unable to find the right words. Jasmine looked at him directly. In his eyes, she saw something unexpected. Fear, yes, but also shame. In that moment, she made a decision. This incident wouldn't just end with a complaint and possible punishment for one officer. It needed to lead to something more meaningful. "Officer Miller, I would like your card," she said. "Not just to file a complaint, but because I believe there's an opportunity here for both of us to make a difference." Confused, he handed her his card. "Thank you," she said, placing it in her notebook. "You'll be hearing from me. Now am I free to go?" He nodded quickly, stepping back toward his patrol car. "Yes, ma'am. You're free to go." As Jasmine returned to her car, she could hear whispers from the onlookers. Some were offering support, others expressing outrage at what they had witnessed. She got into her vehicle with as much composure as she could muster, though her hands trembled slightly as she put the key in the ignition. As she drove away, leaving Officer Miller standing beside his patrol car looking lost and worried, Jasmine knew that what had just happened would not stay on that roadside. The videos would spread, questions would be asked. Change might finally come, and she would be at the forefront turning this painful experience into something positive, not just for herself, but for her community, and maybe even for Officer Miller himself. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Jasmine felt the eyes of passing drivers on her as she knelt on the rough asphalt. The embarrassment burned hotter than the road beneath her knees. Cars slowed down to watch what was happening, and she could see people's shocked expressions through their windows. A few had even pulled over to the shoulder about 50 feet away, keeping their distance but clearly concerned. "This is unnecessary," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the humiliation she felt. "I was just driving home from work." Officer Miller stood over her, his stance wide and intimidating. "I need you to remain quiet," he said, looking around as though to make sure people were seeing him in control of the situation. An older couple had rolled down their window. "Is everything okay over there?" The man called out. "Police business," Officer Miller shouted back. "Please move along." But they didn't move along. Neither did the young woman who had parked her car and was now recording with her phone from a safe distance. Or the delivery truck driver who had stopped and stepped halfway out of his vehicle, watching with concern written all over his face. Jasmine took a deep breath. She had faced difficult situations before, tense negotiations with foreign military officials, Critical moments on deployment where one wrong decision could cost lives. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that cut deep. "Officer," she tried again, "I'd like to understand what traffic violation you believe I committed." His face hardened. "You changed lanes without signaling back at the intersection." "I did signal," Jasmine replied calmly. "I always signal. It's a habit." "Are you calling me a liar?" His voice rose and his hand moved back to his holster, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the growing number of onlookers. "No, sir. I'm simply stating what happened from my perspective." The sun was setting lower now, casting long shadows across the road. The heat of the day still radiated from the asphalt, making Jasmine's knees burn. She was still dressed in her civilian clothes, pressed pants, and a light blazer over a blouse, but the professional image she maintained was being stripped away with each passing minute she spent kneeling on the dirty road. A young man in a blue sedan slowed to a crawl as he passed, then pulled over behind the growing line of stopped vehicles. He got out with his phone already recording. "Hey," he called out. "What's going on?" "Why is she on the ground?" Officer Miller turned, visibly annoyed by the increasing audience. "This is a police matter. Everyone needs to move along." But nobody moved. If anything, the crowd grew more concerned. "She doesn't look dangerous," someone said loudly, enough for Jasmine to hear. "She's just a regular person," another voice added. Jasmine could feel the situation shifting. What had started as a one-sided display of power was now being witnessed and questioned by a dozen strangers. While that gave her some comfort, she also worried about how the officer might react to feeling challenged. "Officer Miller," she said, using his name deliberately, having read it from his badge. "May I please stand up? My knees are hurting and I don't believe there's any reason for me to be in this position." "Stay where you are," he snapped, though she noticed uncertainty flickering across his face as he glanced at the growing crowd. One woman had stepped forward from the group of onlookers. She wore medical scrubs, perhaps on her way home from a hospital shift. "Officer, I'm a nurse. Making someone kneel on asphalt like that can cause injuries. Is that really necessary?" Officer Miller's face flushed red. "Ma'am, please step back and let me do my job." "Your job is to protect and serve," the nurse replied firmly but respectfully. "I'm just concerned about her welfare." Jasmine appreciated the support but worried the situation might escalate. "It's okay," she called to the nurse. "I'm all right." The officer turned back to Jasmine, clearly agitated by the public scrutiny. "I need to check if there are any warrants out for your arrest." "There aren't," Jasmine said with certainty. "I've never been arrested or charged with any crime." "That's for me to verify," he replied, though he seemed less sure of himself now. Jasmine decided it was time. She'd tried to be cooperative, to de-escalate the situation, but being forced to kneel on a public road while a crowd gathered was beyond reasonable for a minor traffic stop, if she had even committed a violation at all. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice taking on the tone she used when addressing subordinates who had made a mistake, firm but not angry. "I believe there's something you should know." He looked down at her with a frown. "What?" "In my jacket pocket is my military ID. I'd like to show it to you." He hesitated, then nodded. Slowly, Jasmine carefully reached into her inner pocket and pulled out her military identification card. The gold eagle emblem and the words United States Army were clearly visible, but it was her rank that caught the officer's attention as she held it up for him to see. "You're a colonel?" he asked, his voice suddenly much quieter as he took the ID from her hand. "Yes, I am. Colonel Jasmine Reynolds, currently stationed at Fort Hamilton." The change in Officer Miller's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from his face, and his posture, which had been rigid with authority, seemed to collapse slightly. His eyes darted from the ID to Jasmine's face and back again, as though he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. "You can verify it if you need to," Jasmine added, still kneeling despite the pain in her knees. The crowd had grown quieter, sensing the shift in the dynamic. Many were still recording, capturing the moment when the power balance changed. That won't be necessary," Officer Miller said, handing the ID back to her with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "You can... Please stand up, Colonel." Jasmine took back her ID and slowly rose to her feet, wincing slightly as she straightened her stiff knees. Her pants were dirty and scuffed from the road, but she stood tall, shoulders back, head high, just as she did when addressing her troops. "Thank you," she said simply. Officer Miller seemed at a loss for words, suddenly aware of the gravity of what he had done, forcing a high-ranking military officer to kneel on a public road over an alleged minor traffic violation that probably hadn't even occurred. The nurse who had spoken up earlier approached slowly. "Are you okay?" "Your knees." Jasmine gave her a grateful smile. "I'll be fine, thank you. Just a little sore." The crowd had grown to about 20 people now, many still recording. Officer Miller seemed to become aware of just how many witnesses there were to his mistake. There must have been some kind of misunderstanding," he stammered, no longer making eye contact with Jasmine. "The car description we had was similar to yours, but clearly there's been an error." Jasmine looked at him steadily. She could see the fear in his eyes, fear for his job, his reputation, his future. Part of her wanted to walk away and file a formal complaint later. But another part of her, the leader who had spent years training and mentoring young soldiers, saw an opportunity. "Officer Miller," she said, lowering her voice so that only he could hear, "we both know what happened here wasn't about any traffic violation or mistaken identity." He swallowed hard but didn't deny it. "I want you to look at me," she continued quietly. "Not as a colonel, not as someone you pulled over, but as a person. Can you do that?" Reluctantly, he raised his eyes to meet hers. "I've spent my entire adult life serving this country," she said. "I've led troops in combat. I've made life and death decisions. I've earned respect through hard work and dedication. And yet the moment you saw me driving alone, all you saw was the color of my skin." His face flushed with shame. But he didn't look away this time. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel worse," Jasmine continued. "I'm telling you because I believe people can change, and moments like this can be turning points." The crowd was getting restless, some calling out questions about what was happening. A few were demanding the officer's badge number. "They want answers," Jasmine said, gesturing to the onlookers. "They want justice." "What do you want?" Officer Miller looked confused by the question. "Ma'am? After today, after this moment, what kind of officer do you want to be? What kind of person?" He stood silent for a long moment, the question seemingly hitting him deeper than she had expected. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, their phones capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. "I didn't," he began, then stopped himself. I didn't think of it that way." "Most people don't," Jasmine replied, "until something forces them to." A police cruiser pulled up behind Officer Miller's car, its lights flashing. Another officer stepped out, older, with gray at his temples and stripes on his sleeve indicating he was a sergeant. "What's going on here, Miller?" the sergeant called as he approached, eyeing the crowd with concern. Officer Miller turned, and Jasmine could see him wrestling with a decision. How would he explain what had happened? Would he make excuses? Try to save face? "Sergeant," he said, his voice strained but clear, "I made a mistake. A serious one." The sergeant looked surprised, glancing between Miller and Jasmine, noting her dirty clothes and the still recording bystanders. "This is Colonel Reynolds," Officer Miller continued, gesturing to Jasmine. "I pulled her over and I escalated the situation unnecessarily." The sergeant's eyebrows shot up at the mention of her rank. "Colonel?" He straightened slightly, old military habits kicking in. "Ma'am, I apologize for whatever happened here. I assure you we'll get this sorted out." "Thank you, Sergeant," Jasmine replied. "I appreciate that." As the sergeant pulled Officer Miller aside for a private conversation, Jasmine took a moment to thank the bystanders who had stopped out of concern. "Will you be okay?" the nurse asked, still worried. "Yes," Jasmine assured her with a smile. "I will. And hopefully, something good will come from this." As the crowd began to disperse and the officers talked in hushed tones by their vehicles, Jasmine brushed the dirt from her clothes as best she could. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, marking the end of a day that had taken an unexpected turn. But as she stood there, watching Officer Miller's face as he spoke with his sergeant, seeing the shame, the realization, and perhaps the first glimmers of change, she felt a strange sense of purpose. What had happened to her was wrong, unfair, and humiliating. But if it led to even one officer reconsidering his biases and changing his behavior, then maybe her pain and embarrassment hadn't been entirely in vain. The confrontation was over, but its effects were just beginning to ripple outward. The video hit the internet like wildfire. By the time Jasmine woke up the next morning, her phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. Friends, family, and fellow military personnel were sending messages asking if she was okay, and if the woman in the viral video was really her. "Colonel Reynolds, have you seen this?" read a text from her aide, Lieutenant Chen, with a link attached. Jasmine sat on the edge of her bed, took a deep breath, and clicked the link. The footage was shaky at first, clearly taken by someone in a hurry to capture what was happening. Then it steadied, showing her kneeling on the asphalt while Officer Miller stood over her. The video had already gathered over 200,000 views overnight. She scrolled through the comments. Most expressed outrage. Some shared similar experiences. A few defended the officer. But what struck her most was how many people were using her story to fuel their arguments, both for police reform and against it. She had become a symbol overnight. Her doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she found 2 news vans parked on her street and a reporter with a microphone standing on her porch. "Colonel Reynolds, can we get a statement about what happened yesterday?" the reporter asked, microphone extended. "No comment at this time," Jasmine said politely but firmly, closing the door. She leaned against it for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Her phone rang. It was General Hawkins, her commanding officer. "Reynolds," she answered, her military training automatically straightening her posture even though she was alone in her house. "Colonel, I've seen the video," the general said, his voice grave. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir. I'm fine. The Pentagon is getting calls from the press. This is getting national attention. I need you to come in this morning for a briefing." "Understood, sir. I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, Jasmine looked down at her phone to find more notifications flooding in. The video had been picked up by major news networks. There were now multiple camera angles showing the incident. Bystanders had recorded from different positions, capturing everything from her being forced to kneel to the moment Officer Miller realized she was a colonel. Getting to the base proved challenging. Jasmine had to drive past several news vans and reporters waiting near her home. She took a back route, hoping to avoid attention, but when she arrived at the base, more reporters were gathered at the main gate. The guard recognized her immediately. "Colonel Reynolds, we've been instructed to bring you in through the south entrance to avoid the press." "Thank you." "Sergeant," she replied, appreciating the thought but knowing this was just the beginning of what would likely be a very public ordeal. The briefing room was unusually full when she arrived. General Hawkins was there, along with several staff officers, the base's public affairs officer, and surprisingly, a representative from the Pentagon. "Colonel Reynolds," General Hawkins said, standing to greet her. "This is Catherine Wilson from the Secretary of Defense's office. The Secretary is concerned about this incident." Jasmine shook the woman's hand, realizing just how high up the chain this had already gone. "Colonel, we've reviewed the footage," Catherine said, "and we want you to know that the Secretary finds what happened completely unacceptable. The Army stands behind you fully." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, still processing the scale of attention this was receiving. "The police department has already issued a statement," the public affairs officer added, sliding a tablet across the table to show Jasmine. The statement was brief and careful. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our officers and a member of the United States military. The matter is under investigation, and the officer involved has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. We take such matters very seriously and are committed to maintaining the trust of our community." "They haven't even acknowledged what actually happened," Jasmine observed. "No," General Hawkins agreed. "They haven't, which is why we need to discuss how the Army should respond." For the next hour, they debated various approaches. Some argued for a forceful statement condemning the officer's actions. Others suggested letting the police department handle it internally. Catherine from the Pentagon emphasized that whatever response they gave would set a precedent. Throughout the discussion, Jasmine remained relatively quiet, listening to the various perspectives. When finally asked for her thoughts, she took a moment before responding. "With all due respect," she began, "I feel we're focusing on the wrong aspect of this situation. This isn't just about me being a colonel. It's about the fact that this happens to people in our communities every day, people who don't have the protection of rank or institution behind them." The room fell, silent. "If we make this solely about an officer disrespecting military personnel, we miss the larger issue," she continued. "This was about bias and the abuse of power. It could have happened to any black woman driving home that evening. The only difference is that most wouldn't have had a military ID to change the dynamic." General Hawkins nodded slowly. "What would you suggest, Colonel?" I'd like to use this moment to open a dialogue, not just about respect for the military, but about how we can build better relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. After the meeting, Jasmine was escorted to a private office where she could make calls without being disturbed. The first was to her sister Tanya, who had been worried sick after seeing the video. "I'm fine," Jasmine assured her. "Really? You're always fine," Tanya replied. "Even when you're not. That officer humiliated you on a public road, Jas. You don't have to be strong about this." "I'm not being strong for the sake of it," Jasmine said. "I just think there's an opportunity here to make something positive happen." "That's so you," Tanya sighed. Always trying to fix things. As they talked, Jasmine's email notification chimed. It was from the police department, not a public statement, but a personal message from Chief Richard Thompson requesting a meeting. After finishing her call with Tanya, Jasmine called the number provided in the email. "Chief Thompson, this is Colonel Reynolds." "Colonel, thank you for returning my call," the chief said, his tone respectful but tense. "I wanted to personally express my regret about what happened yesterday." "I appreciate that, Chief. I was hoping we could meet in person to discuss how to move forward. This incident has understandably caused concern in our community." They arranged to meet that afternoon at a neutral location, a conference room at the city hall rather than either the police station or the military base. The choice was deliberate, signaling that this was a community matter. When Jasmine arrived, Chief Thompson was already there, along with the mayor and, to her surprise, Officer Miller. The officer looked different today, his uniform replaced by a simple suit, his confident posture now hunched with what appeared to be genuine remorse. He couldn't meet her eyes as she entered the room. "Colonel Reynolds," the mayor said, stepping forward to shake her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I want to assure you that our city takes this matter extremely seriously." Chief Thompson nodded in agreement. "Officer Miller has something he'd like to say if you're willing to hear it." Jasmine looked at the officer who had made her kneel on the road just a day earlier. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I'd like to hear what Officer Miller has to say," she said, taking a seat across from him. Miller cleared his throat, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. "Colonel Reynolds, I want to apologize for my actions yesterday. There's no excuse for how I treated you. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the next words. "And it came from a place of bias that I didn't want to admit I had." The room was silent. The officer's admission hung in the air, more honest than Jasmine had expected. "The truth is," he continued, "when I saw you driving that car, I made assumptions. I saw a black woman in a nice car and part of me immediately thought you didn't belong there. I didn't recognize it as bias at the time. I told myself it was just instinct or experience. But watching that video, seeing myself—" His voice cracked slightly. "I'm ashamed of what I did and I'm sorry." Jasmine studied him carefully, looking for signs of insincerity. A rehearsed speech meant only to save his job. But what she saw instead was a man confronting something uncomfortable about himself, for perhaps the first time. "Thank you for that honesty, Officer Miller," she said finally. It couldn't have been easy to say. "The department is conducting a full investigation," Chief Thompson added quickly. "And Officer Miller will remain on administrative leave until it's complete. We're also reviewing our training procedures to address implicit bias more effectively." The mayor leaned forward. "Colonel, we'd like to get your input on how we can do better. Your perspective as both a military leader and as someone who experienced this firsthand would be invaluable." Jasmine considered this. She hadn't expected to be invited into the process of reform. She had assumed the department would handle things internally, perhaps issue a public apology and then move on once the media attention died down. "I'd be willing to help," she said, "but I have a condition." "What's that?" the chief asked. "This can't just be about making the scandal go away. The cameras caught what happened to me, but there are countless similar incidents that go unrecorded. If I'm going to be involved, I want real change, not just damage control." The three men exchanged glances. It was the mayor who spoke first. "That's fair. What do you propose?" As the meeting continued, Jasmine outlined her thoughts. A community oversight committee, revised training protocols, regular town halls between police and residents. Officer Miller, still quiet but attentive, took notes. When the meeting ended 2 hours later, they had the framework of a plan. As they were leaving, Officer Miller approached Jasmine hesitantly. "Colonel," he said, his voice low, "there's something else I wanted to say." She waited, giving him space to find the words. "Yesterday, when you asked what kind of officer I want to be, it's been keeping me up all night. I joined the force to help people, but somewhere along the way I lost sight of that. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm going to work to be better." Jasmine looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the man who had humiliated her, but also someone standing at a crossroads. "Then do that, Officer Miller," she said simply. "Be better. Not for me, but for everyone you encounter from now on." As she walked out of City Hall, the setting sun cast long shadows across the steps. News cameras waited at the bottom, reporters calling out questions. The video of her kneeling on the road was still spreading online, comments and debates multiplying by the hour. What had happened to her couldn't be undone. But perhaps, Jasmine thought as she straightened her uniform and prepared to face the cameras, it could become the beginning of something important. A painful moment transformed into positive change. It wouldn't be easy or quick, but few things worth doing ever were. 6 weeks had passed since the incident, but for Jasmine, it felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. She sat in her office at the base reviewing the latest batch of emails that had flooded her inbox. Some were supportive messages from fellow service members. Others were interview requests from media outlets still eager to tell her story. A few were angry notes from people who thought she was making too much of what happened, or using her position to punish a police officer just doing his job. She sighed and closed her laptop. The official investigation had concluded last week, finding that Officer Miller had violated department policies on several counts. He remained on administrative leave, his future with the force still undecided. The police chief had called her personally to share the findings before they became public, a courtesy she appreciated, but one that also underscored how differently her case was being handled compared to similar incidents involving civilians without rank or public attention. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Chen poked his head in. "The car is ready whenever you are, Colonel," he said. "Your speaking notes are printed and in the folder." "Thank you, Lieutenant," she replied, gathering her things. "How's the crowd looking?" "Bigger than expected. The auditorium is at capacity, and they've set up an overflow room with video feed." Jasmine nodded, feeling a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Public speaking was nothing new to her. She'd addressed troops before critical missions and briefed high-ranking officials throughout her career. But today was different. Today she would be speaking at the police academy to a room full of cadets and officers about what had happened to her and what it meant for them. The drive to the academy was quiet. Jasmine watched the familiar streets pass by her window, remembering how ordinary that day had felt before Officer Miller's flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. How quickly everything had changed. "We're here, Colonel," the driver announced as they pulled up to the academy entrance. Chief Thompson was waiting for her at the door, along with the academy's training director. "Colonel Reynolds," the chief said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming today. I know this can't be easy." "It's important," she replied simply. They led her through the building toward the auditorium. As they walked, Jasmine noticed the curious glances from cadets and officers they passed in the hallways. Word had spread quickly about her visit. "We've adjusted the training schedule to give you a full 90 minutes, the training director explained. "Every cadet and officer on duty today will be in attendance, along with representatives from neighboring departments." When they reached the auditorium, Jasmine took a moment backstage to collect her thoughts. She could hear the murmur of voices on the other side of the curtain, hundreds of people waiting to hear what she had to say. The academy director stepped up to the microphone to introduce her. "Today we have a unique opportunity to learn from someone who has experienced firsthand the consequences of poor policing decisions. Colonel Jasmine Reynolds is a decorated military officer with 15 years of service to our country. 6 weeks ago, she experienced something no citizen should ever have to face." Jasmine listened as the director recounted the incident, noting how clinical it sounded when reduced to a sequence of events: a traffic stop, an escalation, a revelation, a viral video. It couldn't capture how it felt to kneel on that hot asphalt with cars driving by, the humiliation burning deeper than the physical discomfort. "Please welcome Colonel Jasmine Reynolds," the director concluded, gesturing toward the side of the stage. The applause as she walked to the podium was polite but reserved. Some officers clapped enthusiastically, others barely moved their hands. She could feel the mix of respect, curiosity, defensiveness, and perhaps resentment in the room. "Thank you for that introduction," Jasmine began, her voice steady. "And thank you all for being here today. I recognize that my presence might be uncomfortable for some of you. That's okay. Growth often begins in uncomfortable places." She looked out at the sea of faces, young cadets in their crisp uniforms sitting alongside veteran officers with years of experience etched into their expressions. Somewhere in the middle rows, she spotted Officer Miller. He'd asked permission to attend, though he was still suspended. Seeing him was jarring, but she appreciated his choice to be present. "I'm not here to shame anyone," she continued. "I'm not here to tell you that all police officers are bad, or that the entire system needs to be torn down and rebuilt. I'm here to share my experience and what I've learned from it, in hopes that it might help you in your vital work protecting our communities." For the next 20 minutes, Jasmine walked them through what had happened that day, not just the external events they might have seen on video, but her internal experience as well. She described the confusion, the fear, the anger, and most of all, the profound sadness of being reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of someone with power over her. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort of kneeling on hot asphalt, she told them. It was the feeling that my humanity had been stripped away. In that moment, I wasn't Colonel Reynolds who had led troops in combat zones. I wasn't Jasmine who volunteered at the community center on weekends. I was just a black woman who didn't belong in a nice car in that neighborhood. According to Officer Miller's snap judgment, she paused, noting how the room had grown completely silent. "But this talk isn't actually about me," she continued. "It's about all of you, and the incredible power you hold in your hands every day. Each time you approach a vehicle or respond to a call, you make dozens of split-second decisions that can profoundly impact someone's life." Jasmine set aside her prepared notes and stepped out from behind the podium, choosing to speak more directly. "I've spent my career in environments where split-second decisions matter, where the wrong call can have devastating consequences. I understand the pressure you're under, but that's exactly why it's so important to examine the mental shortcuts we all take, the biases that might be guiding those split-second decisions, without us even realizing it." She walked slowly across the stage, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. When Officer Miller approached my car that day, he wasn't consciously thinking, "I'm going to treat this person differently because of her race." He was following what felt like instinct, a series of associations and assumptions built up over years that told him I represented a potential threat or problem, rather than just another citizen heading home after work. In the middle rows, Officer Miller lowered his head slightly. "We all have these biases," Jasmine continued. "I have them too. The difference is in whether we recognize them and work to counteract them, or whether we let them guide our actions unchecked." For the next portion of her talk, Jasmine shared specific techniques she'd learned in military leadership training about decision-making under pressure approaches that could help officers pause and reassess situations before escalating them unnecessarily. She discussed the importance of verbal de-escalation, of explaining actions to civilians rather than just giving commands, of recognizing when one's own stress or emotions might be clouding judgment. "The uniform you wear and the badge you carry give you authority," she said, "but true respect can't be demanded through force or intimidation. It's earned through fairness, consistency, and treating every person you encounter with basic human dignity, regardless of where they live, what they look like, or how they respond to your presence." As she neared the end of her talk, Jasmine noticed a shift in the room. The defensive postures of some officers had relaxed. Several were taking notes. A few were nodding as she spoke. Even those who had seemed resistant at first were at least listening attentively. "I want to end by addressing something I've heard a lot these past weeks," she said. "Many people have suggested that what happened to me was especially outrageous because I'm a colonel, because I've served my country and achieved a certain rank. While I appreciate that sentiment, I have to reject it. What happened that day wasn't wrong because of who I am. It would have been equally wrong if I'd been a teacher or a nurse or unemployed. It would have been wrong if I'd been a teenager, or a grandmother or anyone else." She paused, looking directly at Officer Miller now. "The measure of justice in our society can't be whether we treat people with respect once we discover they have a title that commands it. It must be that we treat everyone with basic dignity from the start, recognizing that each person's humanity alone entitles them to fair treatment. The room erupted in applause when she finished. Not the polite, obligatory kind from the beginning, but something more genuine. As she stepped away from the microphone, Chief Thompson approached with visible emotion on his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I think you reached some people today who needed to hear that." During the question and answer session that followed, officers and cadets asked thoughtful, sometimes challenging questions. How could they build trust in communities where tensions were already high? How should they respond when citizens were hostile or uncooperative? What specific changes did she think departments should prioritize? Jasmine answered each question honestly, acknowledging the complexities of their job while still emphasizing the core principles she believed should guide their work. As the session was wrapping up, a hand went up in the middle rows. It was Officer Miller. The room grew quiet as he was handed a microphone. "Colonel Reynolds," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "First, I want to thank you for being here today. I know you had every right to never want to see me or any police officer again after what happened." Jasmine nodded, waiting for his question. "This isn't really a question," he continued, "but I wanted to share something with everyone here. Since that day, I've been doing a lot of reflecting on how I ended up making the decisions I made, on how I could have convinced myself I was just following procedure when I was really just afraid." The room was completely silent now. Every person focused on the suspended officer's words. "I realize now that I was afraid that day, but not because you posed any actual threat. I was afraid of losing control of the situation, of being challenged, of having my authority questioned, and that fear led me to escalate rather than communicate." Miller took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one who's felt that way on the job, and I want my fellow officers to know that recognizing that fear is the first step to not letting it drive your actions." As the session ended, and people began filing out of the auditorium, many officers stopped to speak with Jasmine briefly or simply shake her hand. Some shared their own experiences or promised to take her words to heart. Others seemed to avoid eye contact, perhaps still uncomfortable with the conversation. As she gathered her things to leave, Jasmine noticed a young cadet hanging back, seemingly waiting for a chance to speak with her privately. "Colonel Reynolds," the young woman said, approaching nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm in my first month at the academy, and I've been struggling with some of the attitudes I've encountered. Hearing you today helped me remember why I wanted to become an officer in the first place, to protect people, all people, not just some." Jasmine smiled, feeling a spark of hope. "What's your name, Cadet?" "Lisa Chen, ma'am." "Well, Cadet Chen, I think your department is lucky to have you. Hold on to that purpose. It matters." As Jasmine finally left the building and stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, she felt both exhausted and oddly energized. The wound of what had happened to her was still fresh in many ways, but today had given it meaning beyond just her personal experience. Whether anything would truly change remained to be seen, but for the first time since kneeling on that road 6 weeks ago, she felt something that had been missing: possibility. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening when Jasmine found herself kneeling on hot asphalt. The viral video had faded from news cycles, replaced by newer stories and controversies. But the impact of what happened continued to ripple through lives and institutions in ways both small and profound. The morning was crisp and clear as Jasmine drove to the community center. Unlike that evening 6 months ago, today she was driving there intentionally, not just passing through on her way home. The center was located in a part of town where police-community relations had historically been strained, exactly why she'd chosen it for today's event. As she pulled into the parking lot, Jasmine noticed the mixture of vehicles already there: police cruisers parked alongside family sedans and community organization vans. It was a sight that would have seemed unlikely half a year earlier. Inside, volunteers were arranging chairs in a large circle. Tables along the wall held coffee, water, and simple refreshments. A sign at the entrance read, "Community Police Dialogue Building Trust Together, Session Number 12. Colonel Reynolds," called out Darius, the community center director, as she walked in. "We were just setting up, expecting a good turnout today." Jasmine smiled, helping to arrange the last few chairs. "How many officers confirmed?" 15, Darius replied. including your friend. She knew exactly who he meant. Officer Brandon Miller would be attending today, as he had for the past several sessions. His journey over the past 6 months had been unexpected. After the department's investigation concluded, he had been given the option to resign or accept a demotion along with extensive retraining. To everyone's surprise, he chose the latter. People began filtering in, community members ranging from teenagers to elderly residents, police officers both in uniform and plain clothes, local business owners, and even a few elected officials. These dialogue sessions had grown steadily since they began 3 months ago. Jasmine spotted Lisa Chen, the cadet she'd met after her police academy talk. She was now Officer Chen, having graduated early in her class. She waved to Jasmine and took a seat in the circle. As the room filled, Jasmine felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Officer Miller standing there, looking markedly different from the man who had forced her to kneel on the road. The rigid posture and stern expression had been replaced with something more open, more human. "Colonel," he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again." "You too, officer," she replied, shaking it firmly. They had developed an unusual relationship over the months. Not quite friendship, but something built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to change. The man who had humiliated her had, through genuine reflection and effort, become an important ally in the work she now found herself doing. "Are you nervous about today?" he asked quietly. Jasmine nodded. "A little. It's different from our usual sessions. Today wasn't just another dialogue. Today they would be unveiling the draft of new police department policies that had been developed with input from both officers and community members, policies directly influenced by what had happened to Jasmine as people settled into their seats. Darius called the session to order. "Welcome, everyone. Before we get to today's main agenda, let's start with our usual check-in. Would anyone like to share an experience from the past week? A positive interaction between community members and officers, or a challenge you observed?" A middle-aged woman raised her hand. "I want to share something positive. My son got pulled over for a broken taillight last week." The officer explained why he was stopping him, asked permission before looking in the glove compartment for registration, and gave him a warning rather than a ticket. It was respectful the whole time. "I know that should be normal, but given past experiences..." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. An older officer spoke next. "I've been trying that approach we discussed last session, telling people exactly what I'm doing and why during traffic stops. It's been interesting. People seem surprised at first, but then I can actually feel the tension drop. Makes my job easier too." Several more people shared brief experiences before Darius turned to Jasmine. "Colonel Reynolds, I believe you and Chief Thompson have something to present today." Jasmine stood and moved to the front of the room, joined by Police Chief Thompson. Their unlikely partnership had formed in the aftermath of the incident, when both recognized an opportunity to transform a painful moment into meaningful change. "Thank you all for being here," Jasmine began. "6 months ago, I experienced something that many people in this room have unfortunately experienced in some form, being treated with suspicion, disrespect, and excessive force during a routine police interaction." She paused, glancing at Officer Miller, who met her gaze steadily. "What made my case unusual wasn't what happened, but the attention it received. And while I initially struggled with that attention, I realized it created an opening, a chance to address the underlying issues that lead to such incidents." Chief Thompson stepped forward. "When Colonel Reynolds Fiu Arst agreed to work with our department after what happened, I expected her to demand Officer Miller's termination and perhaps some mandatory training for our officers. What I didn't expect was for her to suggest a complete rethinking of how we approach policing in this community." He gestured to the packets being distributed around the circle. "What you're receiving now is the draft of our new departmental policies and training protocols. These weren't created by consultants or imposed from above. They were developed through the conversations that have happened in this very room over the past 3 months, with input from both officers and community members." As people began looking through the packets, Jasmine continued, "I'd like to highlight a few key changes. First, there's the 30-second rule, a requirement that officers explain to civilians why they're being stopped, what will happen next, and what's expected of them within the first 30 seconds of an interaction." A young patrol officer raised his hand. Some of us were skeptical about this at first. In potentially dangerous situations, those 30 seconds could matter. But we've been testing it, and it actually tends to de-escalate tensions right from the start. Second, Jasmine continued, there's the Community Oversight Committee, with representatives from various neighborhoods serving alongside retired officers to review complaints and body camera footage. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Chief Thompson added, we've completely revamped our training on bias recognition and de-escalation techniques, and I'm pleased to announce that Colonel Reynolds has agreed to continue working with the Academy as a regular instructor. This announcement drew applause. Jasmine's talks at the Academy had become renowned for their impact, with cadets from other departments sometimes sitting in to hear her speak. But the change I'm most proud of, Jasmine said when the applause died down, isn't written in these policies. It's the shift I've witnessed in how we talk to each other, officers and civilians, about difficult issues of race, power, and community safety. 6 months ago, these conversations were nearly impossible to have without defensiveness and anger taking over. Today, look around this room. People glanced at each other, Black, white, Latino, and Asian community members sitting alongside officers of various backgrounds, all engaged in constructive dialogue. We still have disagreements, she acknowledged. We still have painful moments and setbacks, but we're talking to each other rather than past each other, and that makes all the difference. After presenting the draft policies, the group broke into smaller discussions to review specific sections and offer feedback. Jasmine found herself in a cluster with Officer Miller, Officer Chen, and several community members, including a grandmother, who had been vocal about her negative experiences with police. I still have concerns about how these policies will be enforced, the grandmother said. What happens when officers don't follow them? Will there be real consequences? Officer Miller surprised everyone by responding first. That's a fair question. And speaking as someone who faced consequences for my actions, I think accountability has to be consistent and transparent. He glanced at Jasmine before continuing. What happened between Colonel Reynolds and me could have ended with just my punishment, but she saw an opportunity for something more important than punishing one officer. She pushed for systemic change. But the punishment part matters too, Officer Chen added. If officers see others getting away with misconduct, no policy on paper will change behavior. The conversation continued, sometimes becoming heated but always returning to a place of mutual respect. Jasmine mostly listened, stepping in occasionally to redirect or clarify. She found herself marveling at how far they had come, not just her and Officer Miller, but the entire room full of people who might never have spoken to each other under different circumstances. As the session wound down, Chief Thompson called for final thoughts. A young man who had been quiet throughout stood up. I just want to say something to Colonel Reynolds. My uncle was pulled over last year, and he ended up spending the night in jail because the situation escalated over nothing. There was no video, no special rank to protect him. He was just another black man who looked suspicious. What happened to you was wrong, but at least something good came from it. So thank you for not just moving on with your life after it was over. Jasmine felt tears threatening to form but maintained her composure. Thank you for that. But I want to be clear, the work we're doing isn't charity or community service for me. It's necessary, because what happened to me and to your uncle and to countless others isn't just about individual officers making bad decisions. It's about systems and cultures that need to change. As people began to leave, exchanging contact information, and making plans for future collaborations, Officer Miller approached Jasmine one last time. I have something for you, he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was an official letter, confirming his new assignment. He had been appointed as a training officer, specializing in bias recognition and de-escalation. They asked me to help teach other officers, he said, a mix of pride and humility in his voice, using my experience as a case study. That's excellent news, Jasmine replied genuinely. I wouldn't be here without you, he said. Most people in your position would have just wanted me fired, end of story. Jasmine shook her head. Firing one officer doesn't change a system. What matters is what we're building now. As she left the community center and drove home along the same route where she'd been pulled over 6 months earlier, Jasmine reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. The humiliation of kneeling on that road had been transformed into something powerful, not erased or forgotten, but channeled into meaningful action. The news vans were long gone. The viral video had been replaced by newer outrageous clips. But here in this community, something lasting was taking root. Not a perfect solution or a complete fix for centuries of complicated history, but a beginning, a model perhaps for how other communities might start their own difficult conversations. As Jasmine stopped at the very intersection where Officer Miller had first turned on his flashing lights, she smiled at the thought that sometimes the most important journeys start in the most unexpected ways. The road ahead was still long, but at least now they were traveling it together, eyes open to both the challenges and possibilities.